Hi everyone, welcome to my room, guys. It's Ren speaking, as you know, and today we're going to talk about INFJ's memories. It's really so bad as people say, by opposition with SI memory, presumably, because that's often what's, this whole topic is about. Now, before I move on, remember that you can get my book on the INFJ, the Ecstatic Soul. All the links are below. Ebook, paperback. Get your copy if you haven't got it yet. Deepest Investigation of the INFJ. Hopefully a sequel to come out next year. There's also my book, The Infinite Castle, which you can get. Take a look, supports my channel, supports my writing if you're into fiction, surreal fiction, postmodern fiction. Rumor has it the main character is an INFJ. I'm not saying it, readers are saying it. So get a copy, and you can also support my Patreon page. Thank you so much to my supporters. Anywhere from €3 a month supports the channel, massively helps me keep going. So, is INFJ memory, is that the INFJ ability to recall really that defective, or if not defective, at least not a strong point in their arsenal of capacities? I don't think so. I think this is a bit of a myth, or rather, there is a grain of truth in it which has been widely distorted into a myth. Often, what I've noticed is that people prefer the idea of being INFJ than the idea of being ISFJ, for instance, or INTJ over ISTJ. It's kind of, you're much more likely to meet like non-INTJs masquerading as INTJs, like fake INTJs or fake INFJs, than like fake ISFJs or fake ISTJs. These are not sexy types. But it's almost as if when people want to say positive things about ISFJs and ISTJs, there are plenty of positive things, but when people who have that position of slight discrimination, they want to say, well, nevertheless, they still have that. Often what they find is the strong recall ability, the ability to recall the past in a great amount of detail. And they will say, sure, at least on that front, you're much stronger than INFJs and INTJs. And there is more generally that notion that strong SI types have stronger recall abilities and memory than NI types. It's not entirely true, because when someone says this, they're failing to make a pretty important distinction. In fact, there's two sets of distinctions. I'll start by the first distinction in the first part of the video, and I'll finish with the second distinction in the second part. So the first distinction is to simply draw, a line of separation between factual local memory and abstract non-local memory. NI, and this is something that Carl Jung has been telling us for a long time, even after his death in all his books. NI is connected to inner contents of the mind in the shape of artifacts of the artifacts and archetypes of the collective unconscious, which is itself a strong repository of collective memory through the sedimentation of earlier ages. And you see, if you see an evocation of this topic in the works of Rupert Sheldrake. Rupert Sheldrake obviously has his own spin on this idea through the notion of morphic resonance, and obviously he doesn't necessarily talk about NI, although he himself, if you just look at the way he is almost certainly an INFJ, and it's interesting in itself that he is the one who developed the concept of morphic resonance, and that Carl Jung, also an INFJ, is the one who talked about the idea of collective unconscious, where both past, present, and future interact in symbolic manner, in such a way that you don't predict the future, but you see the patterns out of which the modes of the future will emerge. So INFJ is really in contact with this. So they're constantly contemplating the past in terms of linking it to the future. And since the works of Martin Heidegger, and probably before that, but Heidegger really articulated this idea very well, you can't really project yourself into the future from placelessness. In order to project yourself, you need energy, you need to be able to gather momentum toward the projection. And that obviously comes from a deep anchoring and grounding in the past. So INFJs are very past-focused people, and that's not something that is often recognized, because often when we think of memory, the past, the ability to recall, we think of the factual past, we think of the local past, this event, that particular object in the environment. And it's true that that's really the focus of the more literal recall ability of SI, which usually those local elements are aggregated into wholes through the use of extrovert perception and NE, in this case. SI and NE work really together to make these wholes out of local parts. With NI and SE working together, and the INFJ SE is not very conscious, so that poses a further problem, which we'll discuss in the second part of the video. that kind of localization of gathering of facts just doesn't really operate, because that's not how NI works. So NI is much more in contact with these wide, long-term, really long-term patterns of past events, not really into the local, the discrete. NI is not a discrete ability to recall, but it is still very, very oriented towards what has happened and will happen as an outgrowth of what has happened. Sometimes the INFJ is not conscious of this because, like I said, the content is abstract and very symbolic, like all archetypes are. It's a function of their ability to cross past and future. And language, the linguistic medium, is, in the way that we relate to it and have related to it for a while now, is we think of it as an ability, language, to represent external reality, historical reality, in the shape of facts, in the shape of what is literal, in the shape of what is discrete and has limits. Not easy to use the medium of language to represent the particular content of NI recall, which is why INFJs, I have to assume INTJs too, are often mistakenly assumed not to have good memory. It's just different memory. Now, the second distinction that I wanted to draw is a distinction between memory and attention, or memory and concentration. Just because someone doesn't remember something might not mean that their memory is bad. It might mean that they were not focused enough on the object in question, that they're not now recalling, to remember it. And it might be the case that, or it may well be the case that if they had to have focused on the object, they would remember it well. Maybe they would remember it better than the person who remembers it because their focus was there. If you have read the Ecstatic Soul, you will know what I'm about to say. If you have not read it, in the Ecstatic Soul, there is the very important concept of alienation in the life of an INFJ, which is a consequence of SE inferior. So INFJ's gathering function in the external world is mostly unconscious, which means that they experience a deep sense of alienation from the everyday happenings, sensory happenings of the world. The sensory happening of the world are to a large extent, the factual happenings of the world, the physical and discrete happening and local happenings of the world. This is happening right now. I'm focusing on it. INFJs don't have the tendency to focus on these things because they're alienated. This is what they're alienated from. This is when an INFJ says, I like to de-alienate myself. I want to bring more presence in my life, more mindfulness, as a somewhat trendy term these days, is to be aware of the present moment, aware of the discrete facts that surround them. But it's not what NI does best because it's not helped by SE so much, given that SE is inferior. What is the consequence of this? A deficit of attention, focus, concentration on these objects. So of course, INFJs are less likely to remember these facts, these concrete, discrete facts, because they don't focus on them in the first place. They're alienated from them. They're alienated from them and much more focused on what's happening in there, which is abstract, which is symbolic, which is not discrete, it's not local, and is, for all these different reasons, much harder to express in language, like I expressed, like I explained in the elucidation of the first distinction. So the second distinction is to say, yes, INFJs will often tend to be unfocused on things that are sensory, local, and everyday that happens around them. And for this reason, they will tend not to remember these things. Doesn't mean they have a bad memory. It only means that their focus and their concentration is highly selective. Now, that's the double distinction I wanted to bring, to bring into relief, to bring forth. Let me know in the comments if that makes sense to you. And if you're an INFJ, how do you relate to your recall and your memory? If you're not an INFJ, what is your perspective on INFJs and maybe on your own type as well? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget, you can support me on Patreon. Okay. See you guys at the weekend and take good care of yourself.